So basically what I'm talking about doing here is using a standard forward bend, just your standard kind of hamstring stretch, right? And so you're essentially hip hinging. You want to look at how they're bending forward, their posture, all that. If they're just kind of thoracic bending or whatever. But basically what you want to do is get a decent hold or a decent stretch on the hamstrings for at least 10 seconds until they get that stretch response, until the nervous system lets go, relaxes a little bit, and you get that little burst. Usually it's 10 to 12 seconds, you'll feel that little extra stretch come in. That's the nervous system shutting down the muscles a little bit, relaxing the sort of the stretch response, the trigger response to the stretch, and you get that nervous system quieting down the hamstrings a little bit, right? So if we do that a couple times, we're going to start to quiet down the hamstrings from participating so much, so that we can turn on the glutes a little bit more effectively. So we can go from here to now using a simple stretch to create. So when we're translating the force from the ground up into the pelvis, so through the joints into the pelvis to create the rotational speed. When we're doing that, internal rotation at the hips is extremely important. Internal external rotation for sure, but internal rotation is probably the more important of the two, because it's the internal rotation, especially into the lead side, but even to the rear side when we're loading up, that allows for an effective pelvic movement around the hip joint. So once we've gone into a long duration hold here, stretch out the hamstrings, quiet them down a little bit, we can go into a simple external rotator type of stretch, pull outside, IT all the way down, and we can, at the same time that we're doing that, we can create the counter torque movement. So for example, after we've done this, we bring our right knee up, straighten the posture, get in a good posture so the spine isn't hunched over, so effective posture. So if it's my right, take my left to bind around, use the other hand just to bind, pull my chest up so that my spine is in good posture, and I'm creating an upper thoracic pelvic differentiation. At the same time, I'm stretching the outside of the leg from IT all the way down into external rotators. So I'm getting a good stretch to improve my ability to internally rotate, but I'm also stimulating the nervous system to create upper thoracic pelvic differentiation or dissociation, which is a really important part of the swing mechanism. So I can do that obviously on both sides, right? So that's the first two. And what we're doing then from there is a hip thrust. This can be a bridge. It can be a hip thrust. You can use a Swiss ball to do it. There's all kinds of different variations for it. But let's just do a quick bridge. Very simple type of bridge. But if I lay here. So what I've done is, when I got the hamstrings kind of quieted down, I've now created some pelvic mobility about the hip joints, especially internal rotation. At the same time I've done that, I'm using the pelvis as an anchor to create upper thoracic dissociation. So I'm sort of working through the mechanisms that are going to be important in the overall swing, but certainly the lower body contribution. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to engage the glute. So all I'm doing here is, and we can do this as a thrust too, like off a bench or off a Swiss ball, but let's just use the bridge is just as good. So all I'm doing here is I'm driving off my heels, engaging the glute and bridging up. So, and I want to quiet the hamstrings, so you can cue them, and I want to really engage the glute. So we can go through this dynamically a couple reps. So we start engaging the glute, quieting down the hamstring, push off the heels a little bit, engage the glute more, but we start to say, wake up the glute, quiet down the hamstring in a more dynamic way. So we're working through that. So then the hip flexor psoas. So what we can do there is, remember extension is really important, right? So we want to stretch, we want to continue to stretch. Obviously, tightness in the front side is also an issue for a lot of people. So we want to stretch hip flexors and psoas, and we want to get some mobility going on the front side. So we can use a very standard sort of forward lunge, right? But what's cool about the forward lunge, if we do this, is when we stretch this way, right, we're getting a psoas hip flexor stretch here to create some mobility as we've just kind of worked around the hip and the pelvic structure. So, but then when we're in a lunge position like this, we are engaging isometrically, but we're engaging our quad to hold that position and our glute, right? So in this position, we definitely have isometric engagement of the quad and the glute, right? So we're engaging the two primary areas that we want to use for force production, while at the same time we're creating some stretch to the front part of the hip and creating a little bit of better mobility, but also now creating some pelvic control because there's a pelvic tilt component. We can enhance the stretch by reaching up, so we can get higher and lower down into the quad, and we get a nice big stretch. We can even create a rotational movement here. So what I like to do is say do a reach, and then a turn, and then switch sides. And then you go to the other side, get in a nice position where you're in that dynamic, do a reach to stretch, really good stretch, and then do a dynamic turn. And with the idea being, you're now creating a differentiation. You're creating all the components that you need to sort of produce and move that speed and that stuff forward. The last thing is just a bodyweight squat, and I don't even really need to go through this too much, but basically now you're just a little bit more dynamic about dynamically getting into a squat position and driving up, using extension. You want to have a hip and knee simultaneous extension. You want the concurrent forces to be applied. So again, we're using this as a dynamic to create a dynamic where we're engaging our hip, and we want the hip control out of there, so we want to drive, we want to control that action from the pelvis, but we want our glutes and our quads, our hip and our knee engaged simultaneously. The last part of this more advanced system, or more advanced program, is just a Bulgarian split squat and then alternating forward lunges. So the split squat is a dynamic way to talk, and we can use, I'm not going to do it, but you can elevate the rear foot. And basically what you're doing at that point, I think it makes it a little bit easier to perform it. But basically what you're doing here is you're essentially, with the split squat, is you're using one leg to create the downward force and control the downward force, both at the quad and the glute, but also with the torso and pelvic. So you've got the sort of torso pelvic control combined. So that's your downward. I can control my downward interface. Then when you go to your forward lunges, now you're controlling the downward interface. So now I lunge, I'm controlling the downward interface just like I did on split squat. But now when I push back, I'm creating a shear force. So when I'm pushing here, I'm pushing against the ground this direction. When I drive out of this lunge, I'm pushing the same direction. So I'm learning how to create the interface, control the interface, use the interface to create shear. And then so you've now warmed the body up. Now you go to the same basic level, activity-specific functional movement, but you have the benefit of having sort of stimulated or pre-stimulated the nervous system, warm the muscles up, more importantly, warm the nervous system up. So I don't want to run late, but